Aloha, friends. Welcome to Bedtime Story for You, where bedtime stories are read on the public domain, and you can relax or drift off to sleep. Tonight we are continuing on our adventure with the fifth voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. Looking back from the position of safety and comfort to which I had returned, I came in time to make light of the perils I had encountered and the sufferings I had endured. The advantages that had come to me through these perils and sufferings now stood in the foreground of my thoughts, and I said within myself, "It is the life for a man, for how otherwise can he come at the meaning of the great book of the world than by treading its pages?" And moreover, I had conceived the wish to become the owner of a ship, for thus the gain accruing from a voyage to other lands would be so much greater. Having considered the matter deeply, I arose from my life of luxury and ease, and departed with many bales of merchandise for the city of El Basra. There in the river I found at length a splendid vessel, which I purchased. I found a master and a crew, over whom I set my own trusty servants, and having secured a goodly company of merchants as passengers, I embarked their bales and mine, and we set sail. We worked our way outwards, calling at island after island, and doing the usual business that merchants find in those places, until one day we came to a large uninhabited island. Here, while I was engaged in matters concerning the vessel, the merchants landed, and as I afterwards learnt, they found there the great egg of a rook, such as I had met with on my former voyage. Mistaking it for a deserted structure, and failing to find an entrance, they had amused themselves by casting stones at it, so that it broke. Whereupon a young rook came forth from the shell, and they set upon this monstrous chicken in its helpless condition, and slew it, and brought great slabs of its flesh back to the ship. When I heard what they had done, I was sore afraid, and reproached them for their rash action. "For look you," I said, "there is not a doubt the mother rook will seek to revenge the loss of her young, and seeing our ship will attribute the deed to us, and attack us and destroy us." But they neither heeded my warning nor repented them of their rash action. The vengeance of the rook was sudden and dire. Scarce had I spoken when the sun was obscured from our sight, and looking up we beheld the gigantic bird descending upon the island. When it saw that its egg had been broken and its young one destroyed, it flew above us, looking down at the ship and shrieking in a voice that filled the sky. On this it joined by its mate, and the two circled around us, their hoarse cries of rage falling like thunder on the sea. In great fear I bade the master and the sailors hoist the sails and seek safety in flight. Then, as soon as we began to draw off from the island, the rooks left us and flew inland, so that we thought we had made good our escape. But soon they reappeared and came after us, each bearing in its talons a huge mass of rock. One of them flew above us and dropped the rock, so that we saw death descending upon us. But the great mass missed the ship by a narrow space, and falling close astern, raised such a commotion of waves that the ship was flung up on a mountain of water, and then hurled down against the bottom of the sea, before little by little she came to rest on the level tide. Then the other rook dropped the rock from its talons, and fate ordained that it struck the ship astern with a mighty crash. Amid cries of fear and despair we sank into the sea, and all seemed lost. How I survived the shock and turmoil of that sudden shipwreck I cannot describe clearly, for I was like one stunned or wrenched from his mind apart. How I sought to save myself is gone from me by reason of extreme peril. I can imagine only that I touched some wreckage and clung to it, for when my mind returned to me, I found myself on the shore of an island, sitting upon a plank, which it seemed had borne me hither. That I had fought against wind and wave I knew, for I was well nigh exhausted. I could do nothing more than drag myself painfully to a sheltered spot, where I rested and slept. When I arose later in the day, I was refreshed, and having found both fruit and water, I ate and drank, and my strength returned to me. I went forth upon the island, and to and fro in it, but I found no other's footprint on the shore, nor any sign of human habitation from coast to coast. That there was a dweller there I was soon to learn, and to my cost. It was on the following day towards evening, when I was walking among the trees, that I came upon an old man sitting on the bank of a stream. He was a comely old man with flowing silver locks and an ample white beard. He was clothed from the waist downward with the leaves of trees threaded together. As I regarded him for some moments, I felt that his whole aspect betokened a disposition of simplicity and mild benevolence. Advancing upon the bank, I spoke to him, but he shook his head sadly and sighed, and I saw that his speech was gone. Then he made signs with his hands as if to say, "Mount me upon thy neck and carry me across the stream." I felt kindly disposed towards this mild and gentle old man, and wished to do him a service, so I mounted him upon my neck and took him across the stream. "Now," I said, "thou canst dismount when it pleaseth thee." But instead of dismounting, he wound his legs still more closely around my neck, and pressed his feet into my chest, so that I cried out with pain and rage and attempted to throw him from my shoulders. But my frantic efforts were in vain. He stuck like a leech, and I could not dislodge him. Indeed, he clung so tight that he nearly throttled me, and I fell to the ground exhausted. Then he belabored me sorely with his feet until I rose with him again, and in this way he compelled me to obey. When he would go in among the trees, he made a sign with his hand, and if I obeyed not with alacrity, he beat me with his feet unmercifully. By reason of his behavior, I was at last compelled to cancel my first opinion of him, and though he cleaved to me night and day, we were by no means friends. I was his captive, and he ceased not to remind me of it. If I dallied by the way, or stumbled, his hard feet would rain blows upon me, and at night, when he slept with his legs wound tightly around my neck, he would often dream that I had disobeyed him, and would beat me violently with his feet and hands. For many, many days I was ridden hither and thither at the will of this obstinate old fellow, who, though he could not torment me with speech, was truculent enough in his manner, and I reproached myself for having desired to do him a service, saying constantly in my mind, "But Allah, I never again, while living, will I do a service to any." At length one day the old man guided and belabored me into a space on the island where pumpkins grew in abundance. While he was eating some of these, I took others that were ripe, and having cleaned out the seeds and coarse matter through a small aperture, filled them with the juice of grapes. Then I filled up the apertures and laid the pumpkins in the sun. Thus in a few days I procured pure wine, and every day thereafter, while the old man on my neck ate of the pumpkins, I drank of the wine until I became intoxicated, and laughed and sang and danced about with him among the trees. And when with fist and heel he desired to know the cause of this, I showed him the wine that I had made. Seeing that its effect upon me was so agreeable, he sought to achieve the same happy result by drinking largely of it himself, so that he grew hilarious and broke a pumpkin over my head, rocking and rolling in his seat with laughter. Then as he continued to drink, he gradually lost control of his limbs, and lolled from side to side, whereupon I grasped his feet and unwound them from my neck, and threw him on the ground, and so at last, to rid the earth of such a monster, I slew him, and left him there for the vultures. After this, happiness returned to me, and I went about the island like one relieved of a heavy burden, as indeed I had been, and day by day I sat by the sea watching for a vessel. But I lived upon the island many days, before at last I saw a ship approach, and cast anchor off the shore. When the passengers had landed, I ran towards them, and welcomed them, answering their many questions respecting my condition. They listened to my story with great amazement, and then said, This old man of whom thou speakest is surely he whom they call the Old Man of the Sea. He hath ridden many to death, and none hath escaped but thee. Therefore praise God for thy deliverance. He took me to the ship and set food before me, and after I had eaten, they brought me some clean clothes, and I clad myself decently. As the ship set sail for El Basra, my thoughts went before it to Baghdad, the abode of peace. But I was destined to mischance, for a strange thing befell me. We had journeyed but a few days when we came to an island, whereon was a city with lofty spires and splendid houses. This was the city of apes, of which I had heard that at night time the people, fearing the apes, put out in boats upon the sea, so to sleep in safety. I landed on this island with some companions, and in our going about the city I missed them. While I was searching everywhere, they must have returned to the ship, thinking I had preceded them, for when I reached the shore later, the vessel had gone. I reproached myself for this mishap, for I had already suffered once at the hands of the apes. So I sat on the seashore, bemoaning my fate. While I was doing this, one of the people of the city came to me and inquired as to my trouble, and I told him. Then come with us in our boat, he said, for the night is falling, and if thou remain in the city, the apes will devour thee. So I went with them, and we pushed off together with a multitude of other boats until we rested about a mile from the shore, and there we remained and slept till the morning, when everyone returned to the city and went about his occupation. And in like manner as the inhabitants sleep upon the sea by night and dwell in the city by day, so the apes infest the city by night and sleep in the forest by day. Woe betide any remaining in that city after the sun goes down, for he will of a certainty be torn limb from limb and devoured. I earned my bread in that island in a strange manner, and was able to set by a small store of gold. It was in this way I observed many of the people gathering pebbles on the shore and placing them in bags, and when they had collected a sufficient quantity, they went forth into a valley filled with lofty trees. Here slept the apes among the branches, for the trees were so high that none but an ape could climb them. It was the way of the people then to pelt the apes with the pebbles, whereupon they awoke, screaming and chattering, and plucked the fruit from the trees and hurled it down at their tormentors. And I saw that the fruit was coconut. When a sufficient number of these nuts had been secured, the people gathered them up and returned to the city, where they sold them. Very soon I too was gathering pebbles and pelting the apes in the trees, and in this way I amassed a great store of coconuts. These I sold and bought merchandise and traded and prospered in the city. In this way I continued for a long time, until at last I took to buying coconuts from the people and sorting them against the arrival of a ship, when I hoped to sell them in bulk. At length a large vessel anchored off the island, and I bargained with the merchants thereon. They agreed with me upon a good price for my store. With the money thus obtained, I bought more of the merchandise of the place and embarked it on the ship. Then, bidding farewell to my companions in the city, I took my departure. The ship was bound for El Basra, but on the voyage we lingered to visit many islands that I had not seen before. Upon one we found an abundance of cinnamon and pepper, and here I noted a peculiar thing. On every bunch of pepper was a large leaf that hung down when the sun shone, but when it rained, this leaf twisted and erected itself above the tendrils to shield them, and this is truth. So we sailed onwards past the islands of the aloe wood, where the people were depraved and know not the call to prayer, until we came at length to the island of pearls. Here I gave some coconuts to the divers, saying, "Dive for me for luck." They dived in the sea and returned to the surface with pearls of great size, which they gave to me, assuring me that my fortune was of the best. So that when we reached El Basra, I was rich with pearls and merchandise, some of which I sold there, and some here in Baghdad. Once more in the lap of luxury and reposing in the bosom of my family, I returned to my former life of revelry and ease, and soon forgot the hardships I had endured. And this is the whole story of my 5th voyage. Return tomorrow, O Sinbad the landsman, and thou shalt hear from me the adventures of my 6th voyage, for they are even yet more wonderful. The 6th voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. On a day when I was living happily in Baghdad, having forgotten the perils and dangers of my former voyages, I was sitting at ease in my garden when a party of merchants came to me, and their tales of travel aroused within my bosom a great longing to again engage in the hazardous delights of those things. I pondered long upon the matter, and though I had said within myself, "Never will I set forth again," I found that my mind was made up in spite of me. Therefore I set about collecting merchandise, and having packed a goodly number of bales, I departed for El Basra, where I took ship upon a company of merchants and others of high repute. The outward voyage was pleasant and fortunate, and we did as others do, buying and selling and amusing ourselves in different cities. There came a day of disaster when the master of the ship suddenly discovered that we had wandered from our course and had lost our reckoning. He plucked his beard and smote his breast and cried out in despair that we had sailed into an unknown sea where dire perils awaited us. And so it proved, for not long afterwards, while we were sailing in a calm sea, a sudden wind burst upon us, and before the sails could be loosed, the rudder was broken, and the ship drifted and was driven at last upon the sides of a high mountain rising up to heaven. She was dashed to pieces by the violence of the waves, and from that terrible wreck few survived. There were some others besides myself who clung to the sides of the mountain, and by tooth and nail climbed to a place of safety. Little by little, when the tide receded, we made our way down among the crags until we came to a strip of seashore, and from this point we could see that the island was of large size, its interior being sheltered from storms by the front of the mountain. But what took our wonder was this: on the seashore was amassed the wealth of 1,000 wrecks, scattered here, there, and everywhere, in foam and high dry, or flotsam and jetsam of richest merchandise, much of it spoiled by the sea, but much more cast high up and still of great value. All along the shore were planks and fragments of many vessels that had been wrecked on the inhospitable coast, and this was not all, for when we approached through the island, we found a spring of pure ambergris flowing into the sea. By this the whales were attracted. When they have swallowed it and dived to the depths of the sea, it turns in their stomachs and they eject it, so that it rises to the surface in solid lumps, such as are found by sailors. But the ambergris that is cast about the opening of the spring melts in the heat of the sun, and its perfume is blown about the island, wafted sweet upon the breeze like fragrant musk. When we had explored the island and wondered at many strange things it contained, we searched among the wreckage on the shore and found some few barrels of preserved meats, and on these we stayed our hunger. With the provision on the shore and the fruit we secured on the island, we were in no danger of starvation, but a kind of fever seized upon our company, and one after another sickened and died. This was a time of stress and despair. Day after day, the living buried the dead until there was only one left, and that one was I. And I wept and waited, and as if death would not come uninvited, I arose and dug myself a grave in readiness, for there was none left to bury me when I died. It was on the seashore that I made my grave, so that when I should come to lie in it in my last moments, the wind should blow the sand upon me and bury me. And in this state of mind, I blame myself for setting out on this voyage in disregard of the lessons learned from the former perils. But God in his mercy had led my footsteps forth, and I roamed in the island, restless for the end. In my wanderings I came to a river gushing forth out of the side of a mountain, and after flowing for a space between banks of verdure in a valley, entered again another mountain. Having followed it to this point, I sat down upon a bank against the mountain wall and pondered, and I said within myself, this river flowing through the caverns within the mountains must have an opening somewhere, perchance in the fertile country where people dwell. For a long time I turned the chances of this within my mind, and at last decided to build a raft and commit myself upon it to the current, for at most it were better to die that way than in my present desolation. By means of ropes and wreckage from the seashore, my raft was soon constructed, and in its construction I omitted not to measure it according to the width of the river. Then, full of a wild hope that I might at length reach an inhabited region, I stowed upon it rich goods from the shore, ambergris from the spring, and the rarest jewels I could find in the beds of the watercourses. As I set myself upon the raft and launched it, I said, if I perish, I perish. But if I come to the haunts of men, I come to them rich in precious things. No sooner had I entered into the aperture of the mountain than I was suddenly encased in darkness, and having no choice which way I went, I flung myself flat on the raft, lest my head should be shattered against the roof of the tunnel. Like this I floated on, sometimes feeling there was a wide space around me, and sometimes clinging to the raft lest some narrowing of the passage should sweep me to destruction, and all this time my terror was so acute that at last I swooned and lay face down on the raft, the plaything of fate and the sport of the rushing current. When I awoke, I found myself in the open air. The sun was shining above, and the birds were singing in the trees around me. I was still lying on the raft, which was tied to a stake on the shore of a beautiful lake. As soon as I had raised myself and looked about me, a number of dark-skinned people gathered round and questioned me in an unknown tongue, but I shook my head, understanding nothing of what they said. At last one advanced from among them, and addressing me in Arabic, said, "Peace be with you, brother." Then I seized him joyfully by the hand and greeted him, but I was weary and hungry, and could give no account of myself because of my utter exhaustion. Seeing my state, he called for food and wine, and they hastened to set them before me. When I had eaten and drunk, and my strength had returned to me, I told what I had come through, and the one who had addressed me in Arabic interpreted it to the others. They were filled with wonder at my story, and insisted that I should accompany them to their king and acquaint him with the history of my strange adventure. So they took me with the raft and all the riches I had laid upon it, and led me before their king. And from his state and magnificence I knew that I beheld the king of Sarandib, whose name and power and learning are known through all the earth. He saluted me in the custom of my own people, addressing me in Arabic, which fell easily from his tongue. This set me at my ease, and I told him my story, to which he listened with great attention. When I had finished, he raised his hand and said, "By Allah, thou hast endured much, and thy case is extraordinary. Thou art greatly favored by fate, wherefore I join my happiness with thine at thy deliverance and safety." I was greatly moved at his words, and begging his acceptance of the gift at my hands, I took the rarest jewels from the raft, together with a quantity of ambergris and aloe wood, and laid them at his feet. He graciously accepted my present, and immediately established me in a position of honor, bidding me dwell with him in his palace. I accepted his hospitality, and remained in his land in great happiness and honor, associating with the grandees and the people of rank. And I said to myself, I care not if the rest of my days are passed in this kingdom of splendor and magnificence. It was indeed a land of wealth and abundance, And there the day is equally divided with the night the whole year round. And when the sun rises, light bursts suddenly upon the earth, and when it sets, the darkness descends like a curtain that is loosed. There is a lofty mountain whose glittering screens contain the richest jewels with rare minerals, and everywhere on hill and valley are wafted the fragrant odors of spices. The delights of this realm held me enthralled for a long time, so that I forgot my own country, wherein is the abode of peace. But on a day when I descended the high mountain and looked out across the sea, I seemed to hear the voice of my own land calling to me. Then, with the far cries still in my ears, I went in to the king and asked him to let me go. At first he demurred and tried to induce me to remain with him and his people, but when I pressed for his permission, he relented and gave me a large sum of money for my journey and also many gifts. When I was about to depart, the king called me to him and handed me a letter written on fine parchment. Then he asked me to give it into the hands of the Caliph Harun-er-Rashid. The substance of the letter was this: the king of Sarandib sends greeting. Peace be on thee, O brother, from the king of Sarandib, who commands 1,000 elephants, in whose palace are 10,000 jewels. By the bearer of this we send thee a gift, for we have a deep affection for thee. The gift is all too trifling, but we beseech thee to accept it graciously and reply to us. Peace be upon thee. The present with which I was entrusted was a goblet of ruby, the inside of which was set with sparkling diamonds and priceless pearls, truly a kingly gift. Having bade farewell to the king and such of his people that I had associated with, I embarked in a large ship, which was bound for El Basra. In good time we reached that port, and I journeyed up the river to Baghdad. My first thought was to deliver the letter and the gift into the hands of the Caliph. So I lost no time in approaching him and fulfilling my pledge to the king of Sarandib. He was greatly pleased with the letter, and when he saw the sparkling goblet of ruby and precious stones, he was filled with delight. "O Sinbad," he said, "this king must be exceedingly wealthy and powerful. What sayest thou?" And I told him of the wonder and magnificence of the land of Sarandib, how the king's seat of state is on a splendid throne placed upon a gigantic elephant, with his courtiers and officials standing about him on a richly decorated platform. Here there are around his majesty 1,000 other elephants, on which sit the princes of the land, and surrounding all, on every hand, 10,000 horsemen clad in silk and gold. And how a crier goes before the king, exalting him to heaven, and another behind him, proclaiming, "Great is he, but he will die. Again and again I say it, he will die." And as I continued to tell of these things, the Caliph marveled greatly at the wisdom and power of this king. "Report has spoken truly," he said, "as thou hast witnessed to me, O Sinbad. The tales of his might and dominion have exaggerated nothing." He then thanked me for my faithful service and bestowed rich gifts upon me, and bade me seek my own house in peace and content. There, in the bosom of my family, I lived at ease, having put behind me the perils of travel and set fixedly before me the determination never to seek them again. Yet, O Sinbad the landsman, my determination was overruled by the direct command of the Caliph, and if thou wilt honor me by thy presence again tomorrow, I will relate to thee the events of my 7th and last voyage. The 7th voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. In adhering to my vow never again to fare forth from my native land in search of strange wonders at the risk of deadly peril, I was contented and happy in my state. While I was sitting one day thinking on this and saying within myself, "I am here in the abode of peace, and Allah be praised, I shall never quit it for the haunts of trouble," lo, there came a messenger summoning me to the Caliph. I arose and followed him, and presently I was before his majesty, saluting him and kissing the ground. "Welcome, O Sinbad," he said. "Know that I have a matter of importance for thee to execute." "Sire," I answered, "I am thy slave." Then the Caliph unfolded to me his wish, which was that I should go to the king of Sarandib, bearing a letter and a gift. "By Allah," I cried when I heard this, "O my lord, be not displeased, but have I not already taken a vow that I will not go forth again upon the sea, lest I suffer worse things than have already befallen me? The bare mention of a voyage causes my knees to shake." And I repeated to him the terrible sufferings and perils I had encountered on my travels, whereupon the Caliph raised his hands and said, no man had endured worse things. "Nevertheless," he added, smiling upon me, "thou wilt go forth once more for my sake, and thou wilt bear my letter and gift to the king of Sarandib." It was not for me to disobey the command of the Prince of the Faithful, and I bowed my head in submission. I took from his hands the account of the items composing the gift, together with a letter and a sum of money for my expenses, and bidding him farewell, went forth, saying to myself that fate was against me. The Caliph's gift to the king of Sarandib was one of great magnificence. First, there was a splendid white horse, the equal of which was not to be found in the length and breadth of Arabia. Its saddle and trappings were adorned with gold and set with brilliant jewels. Then, in addition to this, there were a priceless robe fit for the king of all the earth, a great quantity of rich stuffs from Egypt and Greece, and a wonderful crystal goblet of such a kind that a man's whole lifetime would be required to make it. And the Caliph's letter ran as follows: "Peace be on thee from the king of Rashid, highest in any land but thine, under God, whose name be exalted. We rejoiced greatly at thy letter, and we have sent thee some royal trifles, thy gracious acceptance of which will give us joy and happiness. Peace be with thee." With all these things I embarked upon a large vessel and set sail from El Basra with a company of merchants. We journeyed for long days and nights, until at length we came to the island of Sarandib. There I went into the king in his palace, and he gave me a joyous welcome. "By Allah," he said, "we have often thought of thee, O Sinbad, and now we rejoice to see thy face again." Then he bade me sit beside him, and asked with courtesy the reason of my visit. I informed him and told him of the Caliph's gift, handing him the letter. When he had read it, he was overjoyed, and when at length he saw the gift and the richness of it, he marveled greatly, and conferred upon me all the honors befitting the ambassador of the Prince of the Faithful. After some days of pleasure and happiness in his land, I made known to him my desire to depart speedily to my own country, but it was with difficulty that I obtained his permission. At last he allowed me to go, bearing friendly messages to the Caliph, and I set sail for my own land, glad that I was now free to return to the life to which I had vowed myself. But, O Sinbad the landsman, the chances of long voyages upon the sea are such as thou knowest not of. We had not been many days on our course, when, as we were passing near an island, a fleet of boats put off from the shore and surrounded us. They were manned by a host of men clad in suits of mail. They looked more like demons than men, and were armed with swords and daggers. They drew in on us and attacked us, slaying those who offered resistance, and taking the rest prisoners. They towed the ship to the island, and took all the merchandise in the hold. Then they led us away to be sold as slaves. It fell to my lot that I was purchased by a rich man of gentle mien. He took me to his house, gave me food and drink, clothed me well, and treated me in a friendly fashion. Somewhat comforted, I rested, giving my hands to light tasks about his house. After some days he called me to him and said, "Art thou skilled in any art or trade?" I answered him that I was a merchant, and was skilled only in the art of buying and selling. "Canst thou not use the bow?" he asked. Now I was skilled in archery, and I offered to give him proof in the matter. He then placed a bow and arrow in my hands and pierced a mark at 50 paces. "It is well," he said, "thou art skilled." The next day he sat me behind him on an elephant, and at nightfall we journeyed to a place where there were some high trees. One of these he bade me climb and sit there with an arrow on bowstring till the elephants came at dawn, when I was to shoot, and if I was so fortunate as to kill one, I was to run to him in all haste and inform him of it. He then went away on his elephant, leaving me in the tree full of terror. When at last the sun rose, a great number of elephants came straying about among the trees, and when one came beneath mine, I sent my arrows at him. Late in the morning, a well-aimed shaft pierced the brain of a monstrous beast, and with loud roarings he fell and died. At evening time, when the other elephants had retired from the spot, I descended from the tree and ran with all haste to my master, who rejoiced at my news and sent his slaves to bring the beast in. Day after day I continued at this sport, each day securing at least one elephant. But a day came when trouble gathered round that tree in which I sat. It appeared in the form of countless elephants of large size and a ferocious aspect. One who seemed to be king among them led the others to my tree. After he had thundered round it many times until the whole world trembled, he made a dash at it, and winding his trunk around it, tore it up by the roots and threw it down. When half stunned, I found my way out from among the broken branches. The great elephant came upon me, bellowing loudly, and seizing me with his trunk, bore me aloft. In this manner he led the whole herd of elephants in a wild stampede that made the earth shake, and they ceased not in their career until they came to a valley in which were a great number of elephants' bones and teeth and tusks. On a heap of these the king elephant set me down very gently, and after that he and the others turned and walked away, leaving me there. I looked about in the valley and saw a wealth of gleaming white tusks on every hand, and I said within myself, "The elephants like not the death of one of their number every day, and they have done this to show how I may come by an abundance of tusks without further slaughter." Then I found my way back over a great distance to the abode of my master. He welcomed me as one returned from the dead, for when he had found the tree torn up by the roots, he had concluded that the elephants had made an end of me. I told him what had befallen me, and described the position of the valley where the tusks lay. When he heard this, he was greatly excited, and lost no time in mounting me behind him on an elephant, and setting forth to find the spot where so much wealth was stored. We reached the valley without mishap, and I showed my master the ivory, at sight of which his joy knew no bounds. We then laded the elephant with as much as he could carry, and returned with it to the house. This adventure of mine placed me in a most favorable light in my master's eyes, and because I had been the means of revealing to him a source of enormous wealth, he set me free and gave me permission to return to my own country. He was even better than his word, for not many days later he set me on board a vessel bound for El Basra, and presented me with a large sum of money for my passage and expenses, together with many bales of merchandise, and my return journey was very fortunate. The traffic and I did at the different cities on the way brought me great profit, and I bought many rare things suitable for gifts. On my arrival at Baghdad, I went into the Caliph and told him all that had befallen me, and he was so astonished thereat, and so delighted at my return, that he commanded his scribes to write me a story in letters of gold. And he said to me, "O Sinbad, my son, thou hast done well, and now thou shalt have the wish of thine heart, and keep thy vow, for unless thou so desirest, thou shalt go forth no more upon the sea." This, O Sinbad the landsman, is the end of the story of my voyages. And now, as I have conceived an affection for thee, thou shalt dwell with me, and be my boon companion, and we shall pass our lives together in a state of the utmost joy and happiness, strengthened by God, whose name be exalted, the great, the omnipotent, creator of sea and land.